Juan Herrera, a 45-year-old veteran firefighter, is trapped under rubble after an earthquake rocks his city. Once he's rescued and taken to the hospital, doctors tell him they must amputate his right leg to save his life. But his only daughter, Martina Herrera, a newly graduated vascular surgeon, believes there's an experimental technique that can rebuild his blood vessels and prevent the amputation. Before we start, please subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss more stories like this. Let's go! The roar woke them like some ancient beast. Juan Herrera, a 45-year-old veteran firefighter, was leading the rescue in the old neighborhood when the ground split in two. First he felt a dry crack under his feet, then a tremor that shook every part of his body. He ran toward a collapsed house to save a family. His black helmet still shone under the dust, but in an instant the ground gave way. A wall of bricks and wooden beams crashed onto him like a stone avalanche. Head bowed, face caked in dust and paint chips, Juan barely had time to raise his arm. The direct hit threw him backward, shattering his helmet into 1,000 pieces. He felt a sharp pain in his right leg, as if a million splinters drove into his femur and tibia. A strangled scream ripped from his lips, then was swallowed by the rubble. When the world stopped moving, Juan struggled for breath. The thick, stale air burned his lungs. He tried to move, but the weight of the debris held him fast. "Help me," he gasped through broken bricks and mortar. A fellow firefighter, who just moments before had been prying open a window, spotted him under a faint beam of light and rushed to dig him out. "Juan, can you hear me?" the rescuer called as he carefully pried away beams. "Yes, it hurts a lot," Juan answered, gritting his teeth through every rumble of stone. 60 seconds felt like forever before they finally freed his torso. A cloud of dust wrapped around him like a deadly sheet. With trembling hands, the firefighter checked his vital signs. A racing pulse, ragged breathing, cold sweat mixed with ash. They improvised a stretcher from splintered wooden boards and lifted him gently as one stared at the sky, now dark with dust and ash from the city's collapse. All around, other rescuers raced against time. Every aftershock reminded them the disaster was just beginning. Juan felt his heart pound in his ears like an ancient war drum. But this battle wasn't against fire. It was against the collapse of his own city. "Don't worry," said a calm female voice behind a surgical mask. "We'll get you out of here." Juan turned his head and saw Martina, his daughter, now a vascular surgeon in a spotless white coat amid the chaos. Her determined eyes met his. Through the pain, Juan managed a small, grateful smile. In that moment he knew, even if his leg was badly hurt, someone was ready to fight for him. The twisted metal rods and splintered boards dug into Juan's skin with every shake of the building. The fire was no longer the enemy. Now it was the weight of a ruined house, a concrete trap threatening to crush his bones. A few meters away, the echo of sirens and urgent orders mixed with the suffocating silence of torn earth. "Move that lintel a little more to the right," Captain Sanchez shouted, his voice bouncing off the fallen walls. Two firefighters pulled on a beam with a hydraulic jack that screeched under the strain. Every inch they freed sent up clouds of dust and debris, briefly brightening the dim hallway. Martina, her white coat torn at the shoulder from racing over from the ER, knelt beside her father. She checked his wrist for a pulse, frowning at how weak it felt. "Dad, breathe slowly. Stay calm. I'm right here," she whispered, squeezing his hand tightly. Juan groaned as he tried to sit up, but the weight of the rubble pressed him back down. A raw claustrophobia gripped him. The dull roar of firefighters all around sounded like a swarm of metal hornets in his ears. He focused on Martina's comforting touch and the sound of her voice, remembering past emergencies they'd faced together. "All clear," one rescuer announced as he pried a heavy block free. Daylight streamed through the gap, lighting up the swirling dust. Juan squinted against the bright light. Through the opening, The team unfolded a rigid stretcher. Gently, they slid him onto it. The movement sent a sharp pain through his right leg, and Juan let out a scream. "Careful!" cried a female voice. "Support the leg. Brace the femur." Martina sprang into action like an experienced pro. She had the firefighters fashion a cervical collar from her torn coat to stabilize his spine, then improvised a splint using cardboard tubes and clean bandages. Her trauma training took over amid the chaos. The firefighters who had fought alongside Juan in so many emergencies were visibly moved to see him helpless. Rescuer Garcia, eyes glistening, murmured, "Don't worry, Juan. You're in your daughter's hands, and in your brother's." A sudden roar shook the remaining walls. Another partial collapse. The team redoubled their efforts, fearing the pressure might trap him again. With one final push, they carried the stretcher into the main corridor, where an ambulance waited with its rear doors open. "Quick, lift it in. 1 minute, and we're out," ordered Captain Sanchez. They lowered the stretcher down the makeshift ramp. Juan, caught between pain and hope, felt the cool street air on his face. A brief relief before the darkness of the ambulance's interior. The engine roared to life, lights flashing as the medical team called out the fastest route to the hospital. Inside, Martina slid into the back seat, one hand on her father's shoulder, the other on the vital signs monitor. "Dad, hang in there. We're almost there. I promise this isn't the end," she said. The screech of sirens faded behind them, replaced by the dull patter of dust drifting onto cracked asphalt. Juan lay still on the makeshift stretcher, wrapped in an emergency blanket that barely warmed his bones. Around them, the rescue team had cordoned off the area with reflective tape, and the ambulance lights kept the scene lit. Martina knelt beside her father, hands trembling but steady. Night shadows stretched her silhouette across the ambulance hood. In a gentle voice she asked, "Dad, can you hear me?" Juan groaned and tried to turn his head. He saw his daughter's face, streaked with sweat and dust, her eyes full of resolve. He nodded weakly. "All right," she said. "Let's stabilize that leg." She pulled a roll of bandages from her bag and grabbed 2 broken broom handles she'd found on a nearby construction site. Carefully, she placed the handles along either side of his right leg, from thigh to ankle, to form improvised splints. Every small movement sent waves of pain through Juan. He whispered, "Be careful." Martina pressed her lips together, balancing her professional calm with her daughter's worry. "I know what I'm doing. I just want to see you home, laughing at my bad jokes." She wrapped the first bandage around his thigh, weaving it with the blanket's fabric. Firefighter Garcia held Juan's ankle while Rodriguez steadied the splints. With sure, quick hands, Martina tightened the wrap, snug enough to hold, but not so tight it cut off circulation. She knotted it cleanly at the bottom of the splint. Next, she applied sterile gauze over the open wound, matted with dust and dried blood. From her pocket, she produced a vial of lidocaine. After wiping the area with an antiseptic wipe, she injected the local anesthetic in 2 spots. One closed his eyes and exhaled in relief as the burning pain eased. As she finished the upper bandage, Martina looked into her father's eyes. "Promise me something," she said softly. "Anything," Juan replied, feeling a warmth he hadn't expected since the crisis began. "You're coming home with me. I'm not leaving you here." The veteran firefighter managed a faint smile and nodded more firmly. "I promise." At that moment, the ambulance's portable generator kicked on, powering monitors and a defibrillator. Paramedic Ortiz took Juan's blood pressure and spoke as she logged it. Blood pressure 130/80, pulse 110 and steady. "We'll be at the hospital in 10 minutes. Keep that splint tight and get ready to transfer him to a rigid stretcher." The ride to the hospital became a precise choreography. Juan gripped the blanket's edge, breathing slowly to avoid stressing his injured leg. Firefighters and paramedics moved in sync, each fulfilling their role with the same intensity as the rescue itself. Up front, Captain Sanchez guided them over the radio. Unit 4 to Central Hospital. Take Bolivar Street. Minimal traffic for the next 2 kilometers. With every gentle break, Juan felt a pull at the splint. Martina placed her hand over his bandage and whispered, "Focus on my voice. I'm here with you." Juan closed his eyes, letting Martina's steady heartbeat in his ear anchor him to the hope of going home. The ambulance doors closed behind Juan's exhausted body, and the interior lit up with flashing red and blue lights dancing across the seats. The engine roared, and the stretcher, mounted on rails, slid forward as if it were part of one living machine. Martina took the seat right beside her father, fastened her seatbelt, and hooked the vital signs monitor to Juan's left arm. Pulse 112, pressure 135/85, announced paramedic Ortiz, pressing a steady hand to Juan's forehead to check his consciousness. The intermittent wail of the sirens echoed against the ambulance walls, mixed with the low rumble of the engine as it raced toward the fastest route. Juan's eyes fluttered, and he felt a deep nausea. Shock was setting in. Cold sweat on his brow, pale skin, uneven breathing. "Martina, it hurts," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She laid a hand on his chest, feeling his heart pounding. "I know, Dad," she said softly. "Breathe with me. Inhale, exhale." Juan closed his eyes and matched his breathing to his daughter's calm rhythm. Every time the ambulance braked or turned a corner, a sharp pain shot through his right leg. He could sense his bones grinding under the makeshift splint. It was doing its job, but each jolt reminded him how serious the injury was. "Could you give him some pain relief?" Martina asked Ortiz, holding her father's hand like an anchor. Ortiz nodded and prepared a syringe of morphine. She inserted the needle into the central line they'd placed earlier. Juan felt the quick sting, then a comforting warmth spreading through his body. "That should help," Ortiz said, jotting down the dose. "We can give another dose in 20 minutes if needed." The ambulance continued its sway as it navigated streets littered with debris and dust. Passing a cracked building, the red lights illuminated graffiti on its wall. "Stay strong, citizen," a simple message that struck Juan. This wasn't just his fight, it was the city's fight too. "Dad, when we get through this, I'll bring you home," Martina whispered, never taking her eyes off him. "I want to see you on the porch with your morning coffee and the newspaper in your hand." Juan managed a half-smile despite the pain and daze. "That would be my greatest rescue," he rasped. Though the hospital was only 10 minutes away, the journey felt endless. Every bump in the road nudged the splint and sent new waves of pain. The monitor beeped occasionally, warning of shifts in his heart rate. "Pulse now 108, Ortiz reported quietly. "The morphine is working." Martina exhaled in relief, but kept her brow furrowed. She knew the hardest part lay ahead. The ambulance turned sharply onto the main avenue and came to a stop at the ER entrance ramp. 2 orderlies met them, warning, "Careful," as they loaded one onto a rigid stretcher and wheeled him into the lobby, its tile floor gleaming under bright lights. "Ms. Herrera, please follow me," said the head nurse, hurrying them down the corridor. "We're ready for more tests on your father." Martina nodded and helped guide the stretcher toward the X-ray suite, where a scanner waited. Juan, eyelids heavy, fought to stay awake, clinging to a thread of hope. As technicians positioned his body and aligned his injured leg under the machine, the ambulance's sirens faded away, replaced by the electric hum of hospital equipment. Juan realized then that every second truly counted. Juan lay still on the X-ray table, his right leg resting on a hard, cold cushion. Bright fluorescent lights outlined his silhouette against the white walls. Beside him, Martina carefully positioned his femur and tibia under the X-ray tube, her fingers gently tracing the edge of the splint. "Hold still, Dad. This won't hurt," she whispered as the technician placed a protective shield over his chest to guard his heart and lungs. Juan nodded slightly, clenching his fists. The machine made a brief buzzing sound, then went quiet. Martina exchanged a look with the technician. Everything seemed fine. They set up the second plate, aimed at his tibia, and repeated the process. 3 more images and we're done, the technician said, pulling on his lead apron. Martina frowned with concern. Let me know if you feel any pinching. Juan gave a soft growl. The anesthesia hadn't fully reached the deeper parts of the fracture. Still, he forced himself to breathe evenly each time the plate pressed against the splint. After 5 shots, the technician removed Juan's protective gear and carried the images off to the digital lab. The low hum of the ultrasound machine and heart monitors filled the room again. Martina took her father's hand. "You're doing great," she said calmly. "We'll have the results in a few minutes." Juan squeezed her hand, trying to share his thanks and his strength. In the dim hallway, Ortiz appeared with a tray of gauze and gloves. "Ms. Herrera, your images are ready. Let's go over the report in the doctor's office," she said. Martina helped Juan sit up and guided him into the next room, where 2 doctors and the chief surgeon waited around a bright screen. On the table, the X-rays played one after another. The pelvis, the femur, and finally a side view showing the bone fragments. Chief Surgeon Rojas pointed to the middle of the femur. "Here we see a compound fracture in the upper third and another in the lower third. The tibia has a green stick fracture and multiple bone shards," he explained. "Vascular damage is severe. Blood flow is badly compromised." Martina leaned forward, studying the breaks. "What about the marrow canal? Is internal fixation and vascular repair possible?" Dr. Rojas sighed. "Technically, yes, but the risk of tissue death and infection is very high. The fragments are unstable. Even with plates and screws, recovery would be slow and full of complications." Juan closed his eyes, feeling those words crash down on him. His pulse thundered in his ears. Martina gripped his arm. "Dad, I understand, but I want to make sure we explore every option." Dr. Rojas nodded gravely. "Of course, Dr. Herrera. We'll review protocols and studies, but right now, the fastest and safest choice is usually amputation." Martina looked at her father, fighting back tears. Juan took a deep breath, summoning his firefighter's courage. "I know," he whispered, "but I'm not giving up without a fight." The room fell silent except for the hum of the monitors. Martina held her breath. She knew her next move would decide her father's future. The consultation room was large and bright white, with windows letting in the gray light of early morning. Juan sat on the edge of the exam table, his leg wrapped in bandages and the splint underneath, covered by a sheet. Martina stood beside him, arms crossed, watching Dr. Rojas as he paced around a desk piled with files and computer screens showing the X-rays. "Good morning, Juan," Dr. Rojas said in a calm but firm voice. "I've reviewed your imaging and blood work, and I've discussed everything again with the vascular surgery and orthopedics teams. We've reached a decision." Martina pressed her lips together and leaned forward to look at the broken bone images one more time. Juan put a hand on her shoulder, concern in his eyes. "Doctor," Martina began, her voice steady, "are you absolutely sure there's no other option? Couldn't we try fixing the bone fragments and rebuilding the arteries?" Dr. Rojas stopped by the screen and pointed to the middle of Juan's right femur. "Dr. Herrera, your idea isn't unreasonable for younger patients or simpler breaks. But here, the damage to the femoral artery and the saphenous vein is so extensive that almost no blood is reaching the lower leg. Even if we use titanium plates and screws and did a vascular graft, there's less than a 30% chance the tissue would get enough blood flow." Martina's fist tightened. She looked at her father and saw fear mixed with trust. Juan spoke quietly but firmly. "What if we try anyway? What risks are there? Dr. Rojas took a deep breath. There's a high risk of deep bone infection, sepsis, and tissue death. If blood flow isn't fully restored, the infection could spread up to the hip joint, and that could be life-threatening. Martina swallowed and changed tactics. What is the standard protocol here at the hospital? Dr. Rojas nodded solemnly. Above-knee amputation. It's a relatively quick operation, with a survival rate over 95%. After it heals, modern prosthetics can help you regain mobility. Silence filled the room. Juan exhaled slowly, feeling his chest tighten at the word amputation. Martina's eyes welled with tears. Her white coat was stained with dust and sweat, and her hand loosened on his shoulder. "Doctor," she said at last, voice trembling, "I need some time to explain everything to my father and to hear what he wants." Dr. Rojas gave a gentle nod. "I understand. Take whatever time you need. But please remember that each hour without a decision increases the risk of infection and organ failure." Juan looked at his daughter, determination in his eyes. "Martina, I trust you. But I don't want to live without my leg if there's any chance to save it." Martina met his gaze, her voice cracking with emotion. "Don't let fear stop you. I'll review all the literature again and consult colleagues at other clinics." Dr. Rojas leaned forward and placed a hand on Juan's arm. "I'll support you however I can. But I need to be honest. The safest, fastest option with the lowest risk of death is amputation." Juan closed his eyes, took a steadying breath, and nodded slowly. The hum of machines and the footsteps of other doctors in the hallway felt distant, as though he were in a tunnel. "Understood," Juan whispered. "But before I decide, I need to hear about every possibility." Martina gave him a brief, tender hug full of promise and resolve. Dr. Rojas remained silent, respecting the moment. Just then, the door opened quietly, and a nurse entered with a file of historical case studies and a list of contacts at specialized vascular reconstruction clinics. "Here's some more information," the nurse said, placing the file on the table. "This should help with your decision." Martina slipped the dossier into her bag. One looked at Dr. Rojas with a firm voice. "Thank you, doctor. I'll decide tomorrow." Dr. Rojas nodded and left the room, leaving father and daughter in a quiet space charged with uncertainty, fear, and a promise to keep fighting. When Dr. Rojas's door closed, the room fell into a quiet, almost like a sacred hush. All you could hear were the beeps of Juan's monitor and the soft hum of the air conditioning. He lay on the stretcher staring at an indistinct spot on the white ceiling. The word amputation echoed in his mind like a dark chant. Ampua. Martina sat beside him, gently squeezing his hand, holding her breath so she wouldn't break the fragile calm. She tried to smile and offer hope, but her eyes were full of unanswered questions. "Dad," she whispered, stretching the word, "can we talk about this?" Juan barely turned his head to look at her. His eyes, swollen from fatigue and pain meds, seemed empty. The splint held his leg still, but the doctor's order pressed on his chest. In a rough voice he asked, "Martina, are you telling me I'm going to lose my leg?" She nodded slowly, a slight tremor on her lower lip. She swallowed a sob so he wouldn't see. "For now, it's the safest option. Dr. Rojas believes," she paused, "there's no other way to save your life." Juan's free hand moved to the bandage, as if trying to hold onto something solid. He felt the warmth of his skin through the wrap, and a spark of courage rose in his chest. He was a firefighter. He'd faced fires, collapses, explosions. Quitting was not in his vocabulary. But this battle was inside his own body. "What if I refuse the amputation?" he asked quietly, on the edge of panic. "Will I die?" Time stretched in an awkward silence. Martina lowered her eyes, gathering strength to answer honestly. "There's a risk of gangrene and systemic infection. You could get sepsis, and then we could lose you." Her words felt like blocks of ice crashing down. Juan's throat tightened. He tried to swallow, but it was like swallowing dry earth. He looked back at the ceiling, the fluorescent light painting a sharp line through the haze of his thoughts. The air tasted like a hospital. Every breath stung with disinfectant and broken hopes. He focused on Martina's pulse still under his hand, drawn to her warmth. Her steady voice warmed him again. I can't accept this without a fight," he said in a rough whisper. Martina moved her hand to his cheek and looked him in the eyes with firm resolve. "I know," she murmured, "but we need a plan now. Let's rest for a moment, gather information, and choose the best path." Juan nodded, though his body barely felt it. A softer silence settled as they clung to the present, exhausted but aware that, after this pause, everything would change. The door opened again, and a nurse came in with a tray of coffee and soft cookies. She set them on the little rolling table and said kindly, "Some energy for you both. You'll need it." Martina smiled in thanks, and Juan, his throat still tight, managed a shaky thanks. He shifted slightly on the stretcher to sit up and took the cup with trembling hands. "At least hot coffee," he said with a bitter smile. "Thanks, kiddo." Martina leaned over and brushed his shoulder affectionately. "We still have time. More doctors come tomorrow, more opinions. It's not a leap into the unknown just yet." Juan took a sip and closed his eyes, holding the cup to his chest. The warmth comforted him for a moment, like a late hug. Silence wrapped around them again, but this time it carried the weight of plans to make and strength to gather. The morning light was pale when Martina walked through the automatic doors of Central Hospital. The main hallway, usually busy, was quiet at this early hour. Nurses with coffee in hand, orderlies pushing carts of clean sheets, and doctors hurrying by. The click-clack of her shoes on the shiny floor made a steady, determined beat. Her freshly pressed white coat stood out against the dust and sweat stains from the day before. She tightened her belt, tucked the dossier of scientific studies under her left arm, and took a deep breath before turning right toward the trauma consultation area. At the door to the room where she and her father had shared coffee the night before, she paused to steady herself. She pressed the button and entered. Juan was still sitting on the exam table, the sheet pulled up to cover his splinted leg. He opened his eyes with effort when he saw her. "Good morning, Dad," she said softly but firmly. "How are you feeling?" Juan tilted his head and gave a weak smile. "More awake, thanks to you. The coffee last night helped." Martina returned his smile, her resolve tempered by sisterly care. "We have work to do today." She set the dossier and her tablet on the desk. The metal medicine cart, stocked with antiseptic bottles and gauze, reflected the cold sunlight streaming in through the high hallway windows. Martina let out a small sigh. Hospital corridors were places of hope and fear, and today either one could win. "I've booked the conference room on the second floor," she said. "I want to meet with the surgical team as soon as possible." Juan frowned, still half asleep. "Another committee? Didn't we already talk to Dr. Rojas?" Martina knelt on the edge of the exam table to meet his gaze. "Yes, Dad, but I need them to review these new studies. At Santa Elena Clinic, they rebuilt the femoral artery with a saphenous vein graft." She paused to pull up the reference on her tablet. "They report a 65% success rate in patients your age with similar injuries." Juan narrowed his eyes, curiosity mixed with fatigue. "Do you think they can do the same here?" She nodded, brushing a stray hair from her face. "I'm sure they can. We just need the team's confidence in the method." At that moment, Nurse Ortiz entered with a cart carrying a portable ultrasound machine and the latest lab results. He looked at Martina with respect. "Dr. Herrera, the team is waiting for you in room 5B on the second floor. Everything's set for a Doppler flow study." Martina carefully closed her tablet. "Perfect. Dad, can you walk a few steps with me?" I want to do a quick exam before the meeting. Juan hesitated, then let them help him up. Martina supported his left arm, Ortiz his right. He stood slowly. His knees shook at first, but the splint and bandages held him steady. With each step his breathing grew heavier, but he stood firm, a veteran firefighter. "Kiddo," he said quietly, "thanks for not giving up on me." Martina gave him a warm smile as she guided him toward the elevator. "I'd never turn my back on you, Dad." The elevator hummed up to the second floor. When the doors opened, the light in the hallway was softer. At the end, the door marked 5B stood ready. There, a group of surgeons and techs in gowns and caps waited beside a table with the ultrasound and probes. They all looked up as Martina and Juan entered. Martina took a deep breath, straightened her back, and spoke clearly as she stepped to the table. "Good morning, everyone. Thanks for meeting early. Let's review these flow study results and discuss whether we can do a vascular graft instead of an amputation." Dr. Morales, the team lead, nodded and crossed her arms over the dossier. "We understand your concern, Dr. Herrera. We're ready for the Doppler images and to hear your proposal." Martina nodded with determination. Juan watched from behind, his pulse a bit steadier. He knew his daughter would fight with everything she had, and that gave him hope. The room in 5B on the second floor was set up like a small amphitheater. Metal chairs in a semicircle and a table with a portable projector aimed at the wall. At the back, the ultrasound machine displayed the blood flow in Juan's right leg on a touchscreen. 5 surgeons in their gowns and caps waited silently while Martina hooked her tablet to the projector. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice steady. "Thank you for meeting at this early hour. I know the standard protocol calls for amputation, but I'd like you to look at some recent data that could change our treatment plan." Dr. Vargas, the trauma specialist, frowned. "Dr. Herrera, I respect your initiative, but we need proven, safe options. Amputation is the current guideline." Martina swiped her tablet forward and projected a paper from the International Journal of Vascular Surgery, dated 6 months ago. This study at Santa Elena Clinic showed a 65% success rate for femoral artery reconstruction using saphenous vein grafts in cases similar to my father's. The slide displayed flow, recovery charts, and 6-month follow-up data. Another study from San Lucas Hospital reports a 58% full recovery rate in patients over 40. Dr. Morales, head of vascular surgery, narrowed her eyes. What was the sample size, and how experienced was the team? Martina advanced to the next slide. 40 patients at Santa Elena, operated on by a 5-surgeon team with microvascular training. At San Lucas, 25 cases using the same protocol, saphenous grafts and absorbable fixation materials. Dr. Rojas, who had been silent, crossed his arms. "These are good results, but our team lacks training in such advanced techniques. Also, Santa Elena has a genetics lab for tissue regeneration that we don't." Martina met his gaze without flinching. "I understand. That's why I've spoken with Dr. Pena, head of that lab. He's willing to collaborate by teleconsult, and he can send us regeneration kits. I can handle the logistics." Dr. Vargas exhaled and leaned against the wall. "Our biggest hurdle is resources and training. We haven't trained on saphenous grafts for complex femur fractures." Martina used the pause to move to her next slide. "A training schedule and supply plan. I propose 2 days of intensive training with the Santa Elena team and an initial stock of 3 regeneration kits. I've already requested emergency innovation funding." A collective sigh ran through the room. Dr. Morales looked up thoughtfully. "This is ambitious, Dr. Herrera. We still need to ensure the ore is equipped. Surgical microscopes, specific sterilization cycles." Martina nodded quickly. "I've already reserved an ore for this protocol and spoken with procurement to fast-track the microscope." Dr. Rojas finally spoke. I appreciate your dedication, Martina, and your data is solid. I'll need to review this with the medical committee and check logistics. But if executed well, your plan could offer a real alternative to amputation. A relieved smile broke on Martina's face. Juan, sitting by the door, breathed a little easier. This first meeting hadn't been easy, but it had planted hope in everyone present. Thank you, she said confidently. You'll have all the support you need to give this case a second look. Dr. Morales nodded and gathered the report papers, while the other surgeons shared low-voiced comments about timelines and resources. Martina returned to her father and took his hand. We did the right thing, she whispered. Now it's up to them to back us. Juan squeezed her hand gratefully. I'm proud of you, kiddo. The 5B room buzzed again with computer fans and quick footsteps as staff readied for the Doppler study. Martina pulled a booklet from her bag showing the surgical plan and began to explain, pointing to artery and vein diagrams on the screen. To save my father's leg, we're proposing a two-phase vascular reconstruction. First, we'll remove a healthy segment of saphenous vein from his left leg. Then we'll do a microanastomosis of that graft onto the right femoral artery, just above the fracture site. Dr. Morales spoke up gently. Why use the saphenous vein instead of another vessel? Martina didn't hesitate. The saphenous vein is easy to access and matches the femoral artery's size. Its wall is thick enough to handle arterial pressure, and studies show it clots less often than synthetic grafts. On the portable or table, she placed a 3D printed model of Juan's femur. We've marked the proximal fracture here, and the distal one here. The vascular graft will wrap around these fragments and be sutured in two spots with anti-reflux valves to keep blood flowing toward the knee. Nurse Ortiz, acting as her assistant, added, We've also reserved 3 tissue regeneration kits from Santa Elena's lab. They include platelet-derived growth factors we'll apply to the bone to speed up bone formation and new vessel growth. Dr. Rojas took a breath. How long does each phase take? Martina smiled confidently. About 2 hours to harvest and prep the saphenous vein, 3 hours to fix the bone with titanium plates and absorbable screws, and 2 hours for the vascular anastomosis. So roughly 7 hours total, not counting the handoffs. Dr. Vargas raised a concern. 7 hours under anesthesia is significant. How will the patient handle that? Martina nodded. We'll use continuous invasive blood pressure monitoring and vasoactive drugs to keep him stable. During the bone fixation, we'll pause every hour for 5 minutes of reperfusion, checking graft flow with Doppler each time. Dr. Morales thought it over. What if the graft fails during those checks? In that case, Martina replied firmly, we have a backup. A second saphenous vein segment from higher up or the external jugular vein. Both are in our tissue bank and ready to use. We can also reinforce the area with a collagen membrane to prevent leaks. A silent tension fell over the group, but no one interrupted. Martina closed her booklet and met each surgeon's gaze. I know this is challenging and needs precise coordination, but with Santa Elena's training and our hospital's logistics, I believe we can match their published success rates. Dr. Rojas paused, eyes on the screen. Finally, he exhaled. Your plan is well-founded. Let's green light this experimental protocol. I'll call the committee at noon, and if they approve, we can schedule the surgery for tomorrow afternoon. Martina allowed herself a quiet smile of relief. Juan, who had watched from a chair by the door, felt the weight of uncertainty lift. He placed his hand on the table and squeezed it. Thank you, daughter. I knew it was worth pushing, he said. Martina smiled and gently stroked his hand. Tomorrow we fight together, Dad. The hospital's hum pulsed around Juan as he closed his eyes and let his mind drift back years to a burning building. He felt the heat on his face again, heard the crack of wooden beams collapsing, and tasted the metallic smoke. That night, he'd been first in, sliding over broken glass with his axe raised, his helmet hitting his forehead each time he ducked a burning beam. "Here," he'd shouted, pointing down a dark hallway where his partner Rodriguez was trapped by the flames. "I'll get you out." Rodriguez, his suit singed, lifted a trembling hand. Juan lunged forward and dragged him out just as the ceiling began to fall. He felt the blow on his shoulders, the burn of hot metal, and his lungs on fire from the smoke. When they reached the courtyard, the morning sun blinded him for a moment. He saw Rodriguez's grateful face before his partner passed out from smoke inhalation. From that day on, every fire left an indelible mark. The call for help, the infernal roar of flames consuming everything. He remembered another blaze in an industrial warehouse, where firefighter crews was caught in a secondary explosion. Juan swung his axe at the metal door, hearing its hollow clang, while flames rose around them. Crews later died in hospital. Juan spent 2 weeks sleepless, replaying his friend's final moments in an endless loop of guilt and trauma. That memory tightened his chest. A chill ran down his spine despite the hospital gown and bandages. He inhaled deeply. The quiet in the room echoed his steady breath. Martina watched him with gentle concern. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, holding his hand. Juan nodded slowly, still caught in those memories. "Yes, I was just remembering why I can't give up. Every fallen partner gave me a second chance. I won't waste it now." Martina squeezed his hand and smiled encouragingly. "Your memories are your strength. We'll use them to fight this battle." Juan felt once more the fire station horn, summoning him to action. He felt adrenaline pulse through his veins, giving him courage to face fire and danger. He thought of every child he'd lifted from rubble, or every spark he'd doused to save a home. All of it made him who he was, a firefighter with unbreakable resolve. "What are you thinking now, Dad?" Martina asked softly. Juan opened his eyes to see her determined, hopeful face. After a moment's silence, he spoke with renewed resolve. "I think trusting you here is my greatest rescue." Martina pressed her forehead gently against his. "Now, that rescue will be with scalpel and science. Tomorrow we start it together." The steady beep of the monitors filled the room again, mingling with the echo of his memories and their renewed promise. Juan squeezed his daughter's hand and exhaled, letting go of fear and filling himself with courage. After the surgery team meeting, Martina returned to room 5B with Juan. She closed the door quietly, powered on her tablet, and opened a folder labeled Vascular Protocols, 2024 cases. Juan settled back on the stretcher, resting his head on the pillow and watching the screen with curious eyes. "Dad," she began, "I want to show you in more detail what to expect from this experimental surgery. Let's start with the numbers." 3 charts appeared on the screen. The first showed a 65% success rate for saphenous vein vascular reconstruction in patients aged 40 to 50, measured by full arterial flow recovery at 1 year. The second highlighted an early thrombosis risk. 10% of cases needed a second procedure, but most of those reinterventions were successful. The third compared synthetic grafts versus your own saphenous vein, showing 20% fewer long-term complications with a natural vessel. "Look," Martina said, pointing to the first chart. Out of 40 patients at Santa Elena Clinic, 26 regained over 90% of their blood flow within 6 months and could walk without crutches. 5 had thrombosis and needed another surgery, and 9 had a mild, treatable infection that cleared up with antibiotics. Juan nodded slowly, taking in each figure. "And was there ever a case where the graft completely failed?" Martina switched to the next slide, which displayed a table. "Yes, 2 grafts collapsed," she explained, "but both were from smaller caliber veins. In those cases, they used a posterior tibial vein graft in a second surgery. Both times they restored flow, and the leg healed properly. In the third section of the dossier, patient testimonials and 6-month photos showed mobile legs with barely visible scars where the vein was taken. One photo featured a 48-year-old man climbing stairs without a cane, his right foot firm on each step. "See this image?" Martina asked. "He's a retired firefighter like you. After a car crash, he lost his right tibia. But with a femoral artery graft plus bone marrow stem cells, he got back most of his strength." Juan leaned forward, curiosity sparking in his eyes. "What role do the stem cells play?" Martina opened another tab. "We use your own mesenchymal stem cells from bone marrow, placed in the bone bed after we anchor the plate. They boost new bone growth and new blood vessel formation. In the studies, they cut healing time by 30%. Without them, consolidation can take up to 12 months. With them, it drops to 8 months. Juan took a deep breath, absorbing each detail. He remembered last winter's wildfire, the cold that bit into his bones. He thought how a weak leg would have ended his career. "This sounds promising," he said at last. "But what about infection risk from the stem cells?" "Very low," she replied, advancing the slide. "Only 2% of patients had mild inflammation at the marrow draw site, easily treated with anti-inflammatories. No deep infections, since we use your own tissue." Martina swiped to the pre-op recommendations slide. Strict blood sugar control, stop blood thinners 5 days before, coagulation tests, and an 8-hour fast before surgery. Below was the rehabilitation plan. Passive physiotherapy at 24 hours, partial weight-bearing exercises at 72 hours, and assisted walking from day 5. "Dad," Martina concluded, "this protocol gives you the best chance to keep your leg and regain function. I know there are risks. We must follow every step exactly, pre-op, surgery, and rehab." Juan closed the tablet and held it in his hands. "I trust your judgment and dedication. Let's do it." A brief silence fell, broken only by a distant intercom announcement in the hallway. Martina stowed the tablet and wrapped an arm around her father. "We start pre-op tests first thing tomorrow. Rest tonight." Juan nodded and leaned back. "I'll sleep well, knowing you're by my side." The administrative wing conference room was tense. 15 doctors, department heads, residents, and administrators filled a long, dark wood table. Some stood, others sat with arms crossed. When Martina entered with Juan, a murmur rose and skeptical eyes turned to her. "Good morning," she said, standing at the front by the projector screen. "Thank you for seeing us. I'm here to ask you to rethink my father's amputation." Dr. Rojas, seated at the back, nodded seriously and gave her the floor. Dr. Perez, the orthopedics chief, cleared his throat. "Dr. Herrera," he said, "we already discussed this yesterday. Our hospital's protocol is clear. Amputation is the standard for injuries this severe. Why reopen the case?" The room fell silent. Martina took a deep breath and began showing her slides. Flowcharts, success tables, patient stories, and other hospitals' protocols. With each new slide, some doctors raised their eyebrows, others whispered among themselves. "The point," she said firmly, "is that several leading centers now use saphenous vein grafts with good results. I've also secured growth factor kits from a partner lab, which our protocol didn't include before." Dr. Suarez, from plastic surgery, spoke sharply. "This sounds like an expensive, risky experiment. Who takes responsibility if it fails?" Martina met Dr. Suarez's gaze. "I will take full professional responsibility. I've signed off with my medical counsel, and both Santa Elena Clinic and the Tissue Regeneration Lab back this plan." A ripple of concern passed around the table. Dr. Perez leaned into his neighbor and whispered, "Do you really think a newly graduated resident can manage all this?" Dr. Suarez added dismissively, "I don't trust an improvised protocol over years of proven standards." Martina pressed her lips together, but stayed calm. Juan, sitting beside her, felt her tension and squeezed her hand. He whispered, "Don't give up. We're almost there." Martina nodded slightly and continued, "I'm asking for your vote of confidence to present the full plan. If you decide the risks outweigh the benefits, I will accept that without hesitation." Dr. Rojas rose to his feet. "I understand your concerns. Here's what I propose. Let's form a monitoring committee. If we don't see proper arterial flow within 48 hours of surgery, we'll revert immediately to the amputation protocol." A heavy silence settled as everyone weighed his words and Martina's courage. Finally, Dr. Perez sighed and said, "Hey, but this committee must meet every 12 hours, and I'll lead it." Martina smiled in relief and nodded. "I accept. Thank you all for considering this option." The room's tension eased into quiet conversation. Some doctors checked their phones. Others flipped through the file. At the end, Dr. Rojas raised his hand. "It's decided. We approve the experimental protocol with a monitoring committee and control checkpoints. We'll schedule surgery once pre-op tests are complete." Martina exhaled and turned to Juan, whose eyes glowed with pride. As they left, several doctors watched them with respect rather than skepticism. "We did it," she whispered. "One step closer to saving your leg." Juan smiled and leaned on her shoulder. "Thank you, Martina. You're my best surgeon and my best daughter." By early afternoon, the makeshift boardroom was once again filled with doctors and administrators. On the long table, among half-finished cups of coffee, Martina spread out copies of the International Journal of Vascular Surgery, Advanced Trauma Archives, and a Santa Elena Clinic dossier. Each journal had its key findings highlighted in bold: autologous saphenous vein grafts for complex fractures and 12-month follow-up with platelet growth factors. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, projecting the first journal's cover onto the portable screen, "here are the full articles." Dr. Perez picked up one of the copies and flipped to the index. "I see cases from 2018 to 2023, but how many patients really match my father's profile?" Martina slid the journal aside and showed a photocopied table. In total, 75 patients aged 42 to 55 with femur fractures and moderate to severe vascular damage. 50 of them received saphenous vein grafts plus growth factor therapy. The limb salvage rate was 92%, with 8% experiencing serious complications. Dr. Rojas nodded at the data. Martina continued, "I also have direct contact with Dr. Alejandro Pena, head of vascular surgery at Santa Elena Clinic. He's confirmed by email that he'll support us via telemedicine during surgery and send the necessary biological kits." She then projected Dr. Pena's signed, officially stamped email. The room grew more serious. Even the skeptics leaned in to read it. "Can we trust the logistics?" asked Dr. Suarez, the plastic surgery specialist. "In my experience, importing kits and arranging telemedicine delays procedures." "I understand," replied Martina. "That's why the first 3 kits arrived today, and I tested the telemedicine link with Dr. Pena this morning. The connection is certified for operating rooms, with HD video and real-time imaging support." Ortiz, who had accompanied Martina, added, "And the kit manuals are already translated into Spanish and approved by infectious disease." A ripple of approval ran through the room. Dr. Perez, still cautious, checked his watch. "I need to speak with my nursing team and confirm that this protocol is practical." Martina stepped forward calmly. "Please take 10 minutes. I'll be in the next room if you have questions." As the doctors stepped out briefly, one approached Martina. "You're doing great." She smiled gratefully. "Thanks, Dad. Nobody knows these studies better than I do." 10 minutes later, the team returned. Dr. Perez, representing trauma, raised his hand. "I've conferred with nursing and procurement. We can receive the kits today and be ready by tomorrow morning. I trust Dr. Pena will be available if needed. Dr. Suarez added, and the OR will test connectivity tonight to ensure the teleconsultation works. Dr. Rojas, satisfied, nodded again. With this evidence and logistical confirmation, we approve the final prep phase. The surgery is set for tomorrow at 1400 hours. Thank you for your dedication, Dr. Herrera. Martina exhaled in relief and closed her folder. Thank you all. Tomorrow, together, we'll make history in this hospital. As they left, Juan took her arm and whispered, "Every hour of work was worth it." She looked at him with determination. This is only the beginning. The hallway leading to the consultation room was unusually quiet. Juan, wearing his hospital gown and the splint covered by a sheet, walked slowly beside Martina. His face showed the tension of a final decision. Ahead, the emergency doctor's office door opened and Dr. Rojas appeared, his brow furrowed and a briefcase in hand. His footsteps echoed down the corridor like a warning drum. "Juan, Martina!" Rojas greeted them in a serious tone. "Please come in." Inside, the room felt cold and clinical. An empty stretcher, a metal table with instruments, and a board displaying a large X-ray of Juan's right leg. Dr. Perez and Nurse Ortiz waited with grave expressions. Rojas closed the door behind them, leaned against the desk, and pulled an envelope of the latest lab results from his briefcase. "I've reviewed your most recent clotting tests and inflammation markers," he began. "Infection is quietly spreading through the damaged tissue. If we don't make a clear decision today, the risk of sepsis and life-threatening complications jumps exponentially." Martina squeezed her father's hand, but he gently released it to stand in front of the doctor. In a firm voice he asked, "Doctor, what's the deadline?" Rojas looked up and tapped the envelope. "If you choose the experimental surgery, we have until noon tomorrow to start the prep protocol. Stop anticoagulants, fast, and do additional imaging. After that window, the chance of gangrene and graft failure rises from 30% to 60%. Juan swallowed hard, acutely aware that time was against him. Martina spoke, her voice steady. "And if we decide to amputate right now?" Rojas leaned forward. "Amputation can be done today, in about 2 hours. That removes the infection risk quickly, and we can fit you with a modern prosthetic soon. But you'll lose your leg, and the rehab process is physically and emotionally tough." Ortiz added softly, "If we go ahead with the amputation today, everything can be ready this afternoon. For the experimental protocol, we'll need to wait for the regeneration kits we shipped this morning." A heavy silence filled the room. One closed his eyes and thought of freezing fires and helpless rescues. He thought of Martina's tireless work, her skilled hands, and her determined heart. He inhaled deeply and opened his eyes with resolve. "I need time," he said in a rough voice. "Time to believe this will work." Rojas gave him a respectful, compassionate look. "I'll give you until 6 this evening. If by then we haven't started the experimental prep, I'll order the amputation. After 6, your best chance of survival is an urgent amputation." Martina felt a lump in her throat, but nodded and hugged her father gently. "Thank you, doctor." Juan, heart pounding, looked at both doctors and said, "We'll do it. Martina and I accept the challenge." Rojas nodded, closed his briefcase, and made a note in his pad. "Then at 6 we begin preparations. I'll send the surgical order and alert the anesthesia team." He turned and walked out, his final words echoing behind him. "May science and luck be with you." Alone for a moment, Martina and Juan held hands. He whispered, "We'll fight to the end." She smiled through tears. "Always together, Dad." The wall clock showed it was 5 p.m. The hallway to surgical admissions was dimly lit and busy. Juan, wearing his hospital gown and with his legs still bandaged, walked slowly beside Martina toward the signing desk. Dr. Rojas waited there, holding a folder, his face serious but kind. "Juan, here is the informed consent," Dr. Rojas said, handing him the paper. "Please read each section carefully. Risks, benefits, and backup plans. Take your time." Juan leaned against the wall and unfolded the document. Under the yellow lamp, each phrase carried weight. Experimental procedure, thrombosis risk, possible rescue amputation, life-threatening complications. His throat tightened, but he looked up at Martina. Her steady eyes gave him silent encouragement. "Dad," she whispered, brushing his arm, "we're about to win this." He closed his eyes briefly, recalling how he'd faced impossible fires before. He took a steady breath, focused on the page, and began to read aloud. "I, Juan Herrera, understand I am being offered an unconventional treatment aimed at rebuilding blood flow in my right leg using a saphenous vein graft and platelet growth factors. I recognize the risks of graft failure, infection, sepsis, and possible need for rescue amputation. I also agree to pre-op tests and continuous monitoring as outlined in the protocol." Juan read each line almost automatically. At the end, he signed with a firm stroke. Lifting his pen, he met Martina's gaze. "All set," he said softly. "We're committed." Dr. Rojas nodded and gathered the folder. "Very good. I'll inform nursing and anesthesia. At 6 o'clock we start pre-op prep. Central line placement, stop blood thinners, lab tests, and the first broad-spectrum antibiotic dose." Martina whispered thank you, and Rojas gave a quick nod. The three left admissions and headed to the pre-op holding area, where Juan would rest before surgery. The corridor seemed brighter now, as if their decision had lifted the atmosphere. Nurse Ortiz was ready with the forecart and medications. They set up the four, gave the first antibiotic dose, and began tapering off the blood thinners to reduce bleeding risk during surgery. Martina watched closely to make sure every step followed the protocol. "Dad," Martina said quietly as Ortiz regulated the four-drip, "how are you feeling?" Juan touched the sheet gently and managed a tired smile. "Stronger than ever." Ortiz finished charting and closed the door behind her. Martina sat in a padded chair beside her father, who rested his head on her shoulder. "I'll stay right here until they take you," she said. "I won't let go for a second." Juan nodded, comforted by her presence. In the dim room, the machines hummed steadily, tracking his blood pressure and heart rate. The steady drip of the four sounded almost musical, contrasting with the tension of the day. "Tomorrow will be a long day," Martina continued. "But when you wake up, your leg will still be there." Juan inhaled deeply, feeling deep relief. The commitment was done, and his signature had completed the final step. At that moment, a beam of light slipped under the door, and a distant voice called out, "Mr. Herrera, please get ready. We'll take you in 10 minutes." Martina squeezed her father's hand and whispered, "I'm coming with you to the OR." "Thank you," he replied sincerely. "You're my best rescue team." They shared a brief, determined silence. Juan exhaled softly, closed his eyes, and steeled himself for the challenge ahead. 7 hours of surgery that would shape the rest of his life. After signing the consent, Juan was moved to room 312 in the hospital's north wing. His window overlooked the parking lot, a stretch of asphalt under streetlights glinting in the light rain. At night, the reclining screen beside his bed looked like an old throne, and his hospital gown felt strangely woven from threads of uncertainty. Martina came in carrying a tray with chamomile tea and oatmeal cookies. On the bedside table, she placed a yellow envelope with Juan's name written on it. "Dad, I know you'll have trouble sleeping," she said as she tucked him in. "I want you to read these letters that arrived earlier. They're from your fire station buddies." Juan picked up the envelope and felt the weight of the dried ink and worn paper. Inside were 3 letters, one from Garcia, one from Rodriguez, and a group postcard from the whole crew. Perching her glasses on her nose, Juan opened Garcia's letter first. Garcia reminded him of the time Juan saved his life by pulling him from a flooded basement after a burst pipe. He called Juan his steel brother and wished him strength for the fight ahead. Rodriguez's letter came next, full of laughs in the locker room, team outings, and the surprise birthday party they threw after a forest fire call. "You were always first into the flames, and I won't let you fade away without a fight," he wrote. Finally, the postcard showed all the firefighters holding hoses and smiling at an old camera. On the back, each person's signature and a simple line: "We're waiting for you at the station. Let's carry those hoses together again." Martina sat on the bed's edge and stroked the blanket. "Your crew's backing you, Dad." He nodded, put the letters on the table, and pulled out a smaller envelope of family photos. He laid them out carefully: birthday snapshots, a barbecue in Grandma's yard, and a picture of young Martina sitting on his lap painting a Father's Day card. One recent photo showed him holding Martina's new yellow surgeon's cap at her graduation, both beaming. "Good memories," Juan murmured. "Thanks for bringing them. I want you to go to sleep thinking of this, not of pain or fear," she said, placing a photo on the duvet. Juan took a deep breath and looked at the ceiling. The oxygen tubes cast silver lines in the dim light. He felt exhausted, but sleep would have to fight its way in. His mind replayed every word of those letters and every detail of the photos, stitching together memories to hold him up. "Will you stay?" he asked. "I don't want to sleep alone." Martina smiled warmly. "Of course. I'll stay until you fall into a deep sleep." She flipped off the main light, leaving only the small bedside lamp on, creating a cozy circle of light. Juan turned his head toward the window, where raindrops were forming tiny puddles reflecting the hospital's neon signs. He felt comforted by his daughter's presence and the silent voices of his crew. "Good night, Dad," Martina whispered, settling into the recliner. Juan closed his eyes with effort and replied, "Good night, Doctor. Thank you for not giving up on me." Martina softly said, "Sleep well," and then fell silent. The steady hum of the heart monitor kept time like an extra beat of courage. Cradled by memories and his daughter's calm, Juan let sleep slowly take him, knowing it would be brief and filled with dreams of the future. The operating table was brightly lit, and Juan's right leg was clean and draped in green sterile cloths, except for a small rectangle of freshly cleaned skin. The whole surgical team stood around the table. Nurse Ortiz held the needle holder firmly, Dr. Rojas wiped his gloves, and Dr. Morales adjusted the surgical microscope over the exposed femoral artery. "Martina, you're up," Rojas whispered, nodding. She nodded back, picked up a number 11 scalpel, and made a precise cut in the skin. The blade slipped through easily, revealing the fat layer and muscle bundles underneath. With steady hands, she used gentle forceps to move the soft tissue aside and expose the damaged blood vessel. The soft hiss of the ventilator and the monitor's beep set the rhythm of the surgery. "Here it is," Martina said softly. "Proximal femoral artery. The flow stops right here." Through the microscope, the vessel looked collapsed and blocked by clots and dead tissue. Martina drew up warm saline in a syringe and gently flushed the artery. The fluid ran out cloudy. There was no pressure. She then suctioned with a fine cannula. "We need to get the saphenous vein graft ready," Ortiz said, placing a tray of vein tubes nearby. Martina put down the scalpel and picked up microsurgery scissors. She carefully dissected a 15-centimeter segment of saphenous vein from Juan's left leg, cutting with millimeter precision. She placed the graft in a tray of heparinized solution to prevent clots. 15-centimeter saphenous vein ready," Ortiz reported as she swapped in a fresh sterile field beside the table. Martina readjusted her gloves, threaded 8-0 suture through the graft's handles, and lifted it into the main surgical area with fine forceps. Under the microscope's guidance, she lined it up next to the femoral artery and clipped it in place with microanastomosis clamps. "First anastomosis, proximal end," she announced. With a steady hand and controlled breathing, she began stitching. Each ultrafine nylon stitch went exactly from the artery's edge into the vein at a 60 degrees angle to ensure good flow. On the screen, Dr. Pena, watching via telemedicine, spoke calmly. "Dr. Pena, on screen make sure your stitches are 1 millimeter apart and there are no folds in the vein." "Exactly like that." Martina nodded and continued. In 30 minutes, she finished the proximal suture and released the clamp to allow partial flow. The blood flow monitor's echo showed a weak pulse. "Flow at 40%, Dr. Morales noted. "We need better hemostasis and sealing." Martina applied a few drops of platelet growth factor around the anastomosis with an ultrafine cannula. She cleaned the area with sterile gauze and reclamped below to prepare for the final connection. "Now the distal end," she said. "Hold the vein tension steady." With the same calm focus, she repeated the microanastomosis technique on the artery's distal segment. A visual timer on screen showed 4 hours had passed since the first cut. The team had worked flawlessly. No misplaced tools, no dusty gloves. After tying the last knot, Martina said, "Release fully." Ortiz removed the final clamp, and in tense silence they watched the flow return. On the color Doppler, the artery showed a strong, pulsing wave. The reading jumped to an encouraging 85%. "Flow 85% and stable," Dr. Morales announced. "Fantastic work." A murmur of satisfaction spread through the OR. Dr. Pena on screen nodded proudly. "Dr. Pena, excellent anastomosis, no narrowing or leaks. Let's move on to bone fixation." Martina allowed herself a small smile and turned to her team. "Great job, everyone. Let's reinforce with collagen and close up." With sure hands, they placed a collagen membrane over the graft to prevent leaks, put the muscles back in place, and stitched the skin in 3 layers: fascia, subcutaneous, and skin. After the final stitch, Ortiz rinsed the area with saline and removed the sterile drapes. "Closure complete," she said. "Vascular surgery successful." Martina exhaled in relief. Dr. Rojas gave her a thumbs up. Juan lay unconscious, unaware of the drama, but his steady pulse and intact leg were the best reward. "Vascular phase done," Martina said. "Now on to orthopedics for the final fixation." The OR buzzed with a quiet energy of relief. Tools returned to their trays, and the team prepared for the next stage. The operating room lights were so bright there were almost no shadows. After finishing the vascular work, the team moved on to the bone fixation. Dr. Rojas picked up a precision drill with a 2.0 millimeters bit to attach a titanium plate to the upper third of the femur. The mechanical buzzing echoed as he carefully drilled through the bone's hard layer. Martina watched closely, ready to step in if the blood flow faltered. "Drilling complete," Rojas announced. "Now inserting a 4.5 millimeter screw." The screw went in with a healthy click, and Rojas started on the next one. When he got to the third screw, he felt unusual resistance and a brief, sharp crack. The arterial flow monitor, previously steady at 85%, blinked and dropped to 60%. "Stop!" Martina exclaimed, leaning over the monitor. "Flow's down to 60%. "What happened?" Rojas moved the plate aside to inspect. The drill had caused a small crack in the cortex, shifting a fragment that pinched the distal anastomosis. The vein graft was slightly trapped under the plate. Instantly, the OR fell into tense silence. "We need to back out that screw and reposition the plate," Dr. Morales ordered. "Quickly, before it drops further." Rojas carefully removed the third screw. The plate shifted slightly and tugged on the graft. Martina, using fine forceps under the microscope, checked the graft. It was intact, but the proximal suture was a bit tight. Let's flush with warm saline to clear any microclots and ease the tension, Ortiz said, gently washing the area. The saline ran over the anastomosis, and the Doppler probe was repositioned. Flow climbed slowly to 70%. Martina let out a quiet sigh of relief. "Hold the plate up. I need room to free the graft," she said. Rojas gripped the plate with a bone clamp. Martina rotated the graft a few degrees with microforceps to release the pinch point. She then applied a few drops of growth factor directly onto the suture. Ortiz soaked up the excess. "Try again." The echo showed a strong green pulse. 80%, then 90%. Flow stabilized at 92%. A murmur of relief swept the room. "Flow stable at 92%. Dr. Morales announced with a slight smile. "Great work, Martina." Rojas repositioned the titanium plate and carefully tightened the remaining screws, making sure not to touch the graft. After each screw, he checked the monitor. Flow never dipped below 90%. With the last screw in place, the pulse jumped to 95%, an excellent result. "Bone fixation complete," Rojas said. "Everything's in place." Martina nodded and looked again under the microscope. The graft glowed, nestled in the collagen membrane with no sign of bleeding. "Vascular and bone work done," she said. "Let's close up." As the table was prepped for final closure, the mood shifted. Tension gave way to calm confidence. The muscles and skin were sutured, a compressive bandage applied, and the final splint secured with absorbable materials. Once the sterile drapes were removed, Ortiz cleaned the area with saline and patted it dry. The final Doppler echo showed 98% arterial flow and minimal venous pressure. "Successful surgery," Dr. Morales announced softly. "Congratulations, team." Martina exhaled deeply and stepped out of the sterile field, where Rojas gave her a brief hug over her gown. Juan, still unconscious, lay with his bandaged hand outstretched, and the steady reading showed he'd met the challenge. "A small hiccup, but we handled it," Martina murmured. "Now let's wake our patient." The operating room seemed to glow with silent triumph. They'd passed the toughest test and kept the leg of a man determined to keep fighting. The ICU door slid open with its familiar, soft electric hum. Juan slowly opened his eyes, feeling the cool breeze from the air conditioner on his forehead. The only sounds were the steady beep of the heart monitor and the gentle whir of nearby ventilators. He blinked several times, trying to make out the dimly lit room. A faint glow from the four-pump cast shadowy outlines on the walls. "Dad?" a soft voice called. Juan turned his head to the left and saw Martina sitting in a folding chair beside his bed. She was wearing a clean hospital gown, her hair tied back, and her face was a mix of relief and hope. In her hand was a glass of water. "Hi," he croaked, his voice rough and sleepy. "Is it over?" Martina hurried to his side and set the glass on the small table. "Yes, Dad, it's over. The surgery finished a few hours ago. You did great." He blinked again and focused on his right leg, resting under the sheet. It looked right where it should be. The skin was a little swollen, the stitches in a straight line, and the bandage clean. He could just make out a slight bump where a collagen membrane lay under the skin. Carefully, he pulled the sheet up to his knee. The skin looked tight and slightly purple, but the leg was whole. A thrill of excitement and hope ran through him. It's still there," he whispered. "Still where it belongs." Martina placed her hand gently on his ankle. "Yes, Dad, your leg is still yours. It's a bit swollen, but the blood flow is steady. Look at the monitor," she said, pointing to a screen showing his blood pressure, heart rate, and, at the bottom, a graph of blood flow in his leg. Oxygen saturation is 98% and vascular flow is constant. Juan tried to sit up a bit, but a sharp twinge ran through his thigh. He noticed the soft brace supporting his leg, much gentler than the one in the ambulance. "Does it hurt a lot?" Martina asked, concern in her voice. "A bit," he admitted, clenching his fists. "But seeing it whole is worth every second of pain." Just then, Nurse Ortiz entered with a medication cart. "Good morning," Ortiz greeted. "I'm going to give you your first post-op painkiller. It's 4-acetaminophen. It will help reduce inflammation." With a gentle touch, she inserted an 4 in Juan's other arm and administered the dose. In minutes, his face relaxed. "Thanks, Ortiz," Martina said. Ortiz nodded and checked the monitor. Pulse 82, blood pressure 120/80. All within range. The pain relief will kick in shortly. Martina leaned in and pressed her forehead against his. "You were amazing, Dad." Juan looked at her gratefully and held her hand. "I couldn't have trusted anyone else." For a moment, the world outside the ICU seemed to fade away. Juan closed his eyes, listening to the soft melody of the machines that, instead of frightening him now, reminded him he was alive. He thought of the last few hours, the steady hands guiding the scalpel, the tension at the critical moment, and his daughter's smile when blood flow was restored. Martina shifted on the edge of the bed and slid an arm under his back to support him. "Rest a bit more. Soon they'll come for your first follow-up ultrasound. Then we can start some gentle physiotherapy." Juan nodded slowly and sighed with relief. "I've got a long road ahead," he murmured. "But the first step is done." Martina kissed his forehead lightly. "And I'll be with you every step of the way, Dad." The machines continued their steady, metallic song, and Juan, certain that his leg was still his own, let himself drift back to sleep. This time comforted by the promise of new mornings. It was the morning of the second day after surgery. Juan sat on the edge of his ICU bed, his legs dangling over the side. His right leg, bandaged and held by a soft brace, looked more swollen than he'd expected, like a balloon about to burst. Every time he put his foot down, a sharp pain shot through his thigh, reminding him how intense the operation had been. "Come on, Dad, just one step," Martina encouraged, kneeling in front of him with her physiotherapy notes in hand. "I've got you." Juan took a deep breath and carefully slid his right foot forward. His muscle creaked like old wood, and a groan escaped his lips. Martina gripped his left hand and gently whispered, "In and out slow, just like those breathing drills during the fire rescue that day." He matched her pace, inhaling to a count of 4, then exhaling. At that rhythm, he managed to plant his heel on the floor and shift his weight onto the operated leg. Physiotherapist Ortiz, standing nearby, checked the brace's tension and watched his posture. "Good, Juan. Keep your back straight, eyes forward. One more step, then we'll stop." Martina added with soft gestures, "That's a great job." Juan took his second step, set down his left foot, and bent his right knee a little. Waves of pain rolled through him, but he stayed standing. "You did it!" Martina exclaimed. "Well done, Dad. Now let's go back." Back at the starting point, Juan rested one hand on the bed rail and slid back into the seat. He sat with bent knees, panting. "It hurts, but it hurts less than dragging a burning car," he joked hoarsely, recalling old rescues. Martina stroked his shoulder. "Each day will get a bit easier. You've already passed the hardest part." Physio Ortiz placed a small pedal board at his feet. "This will help you move your ankle without bearing full weight. Do 10 slow pedals." Juan put one foot on the pedal and pushed the crank with effort. His leg shook, but he completed 8 turns. On the 9th, the pain intensified. He closed his eyes and clenched his fists. Ortiz stopped him. "Let's rest for a minute. Have some water." Martina handed him the glass, and he took small sips. The minty taste soothed him. She used her tablet to show him a video of gentle post-operative exercises. "Look, Dad, besides the pedal board. Tomorrow we'll do straight leg raises and isometric holds, designed to strengthen without overdoing it." Juan nodded. "I trust you and Ortiz to guide me. I want to walk through the fire station again." Martina squeezed his hand. "And you will." Step by step, just like a well-planned operation, the session ended with a lighter compression wrap and another dose of 4 anti-inflammatory. Ortiz made notes in his chart, and Martina helped Juan lie back down carefully. He closed his eyes, feeling the mix of pain and pride. "That was a good start," he whispered. Martina settled back in her chair and gently touched his forehead. "Tomorrow we'll go a bit further, okay?" Juan managed a half smile. "Tomorrow, I'll be here, ready for the next step." The ICU machines continued their patient measuring, like an expectant audience. Supported by Martina's steady encouragement, Juan knew every painful move was bringing him closer to reclaiming his life and his leg. It was the morning of the second day after surgery. Juan lay in his ICU bed, the bandage resting on his healed leg, and his mind drifted to distant memories. Suddenly he saw himself 20 years earlier, a rookie firefighter on his first real emergency call. He'd been at the station, checking hoses and adjusting a helmet too big for his young head, when the alarm rang. Structural fire on Las Palmas Avenue. In seconds, he pulled on his boots, slapped hands with his crew, and climbed into Engine 12. The engine roared as they sped off, and Juan, who'd been shaking just moments before, became a focused professional. When they arrived, a 2-story building burned fiercely. Windows shattered, and flames poured down like rivers of gold. Juan shouldered the hose as the captain shouted orders. Beside him, another firefighter was engulfed in flames trying to rescue a trapped resident. Juan felt the intense heat and knew what it meant to risk your life to save someone else. He used his body to shield and carry the frightened elderly man out, tears in the man's eyes. That night he learned the true value of protecting others, even at great personal risk. The memory faded, and the next came. Martina, just 6 years old, running to meet him after a rescue drill. He saw her in the yard with her mother, clutching a drawing of Firefighter Dad. The setting sun lit the picture. A man in a yellow helmet and orange suit lifting a child from rubble. Martina hugged him, taped the drawing to the fridge, and said in her little girl voice, "Daddy, when I grow up I'll be a doctor and heal you when you get hurt." Juan moved, promised he would always find his way home. That night, she slept with her toy helmet under her pillow. Back in the ICU, Juan let those memories anchor him in the present. The same courage that drove him into flames would now keep him strong through recovery. He felt Martina's hand stroking his arm. He opened his eyes to see her kneeling by his bed, gown clean and a gentle smile on her face. "Dad," she said softly, "all your follow-up tests are clear. Tomorrow we can plan your move out of the ICU and continue rehab on the regular ward." Juan nodded, eyes fixed on his daughter. His body still ached, but his spirit soared on those echoes from the past. "Thank you for always believing in me," he replied, voice full of feeling. "For rescuing me now, as I once rescued others." Martina squeezed his hand and rose to lower a blind, blocking a bright sunbeam from his bandage. As she did, Juan knew the next stage was waiting. Step by step, he would return to everyday life, fueled by the same bravery of his old rescues and his daughter's unwavering love. That afternoon at the fire station, the air smelled of cleaning supplies and fresh brewed coffee. The heavy metal front door banged open just as Captain Sanchez, in his crisp uniform, held up his tablet with a serious but hopeful look. 120 firefighters, some in turnout jackets, others in t-shirts and canvas pants, gathered in the courtyard when the alert came through. "Attention, team," the captain announced firmly. "Breaking news. Firefighter Juan Herrera has left the ICU. His experimental surgery was a success. His right leg is intact, and he's already begun rehab. A solemn hush fell over the group. Then, like a rising echo, cheers erupted. Hands slapped against the brick walls, whistles blew, and shouts of "Bravo! Herrera, you're our champion, and we'll see you soon," rang out. Young crew members waved bandanas in the air, while veterans hugged one another, relieved and proud. Firefighter Garcia, who had written the first letter of support, raised his fist and roared, "That's my brother! That's my hero!" Rodriguez pulled out his phone and started recording, capturing the celebration to send to Juan later. Everyone wanted to show him this. An ovation from a family forged in daily sacrifice and courage. Captain Sanchez raised a hand for quiet. "Friends, listen up. When he's ready to return to duty, we'll hold a proper welcome back event. It will be a heroic homecoming, befitting our bravest firefighter. In the meantime, let's keep supporting him from here." Just then, the station's old PA system crackled to life with a bright voice. Internal broadcast, message from the medical team at Central Hospital. "Juan Herrera's condition is stable. He will continue recovery with strict physiotherapy and daily monitoring. Thank you for your unwavering support." The firefighters erupted in cheers and applause once more. The captain lowered his hand, moved. This is what it means to be a firefighter. One brother in need, and a corps united to rescue him, whether from flames or the operating table. Sergeant Lopez, with 30 years of service, leaned in and whispered to Sanchez, "This doesn't happen every day. We must honor his sacrifice with more training and solidarity." The group nodded. In single file and with discipline, they filed past the captain to leave messages on an improvised mural by the entrance. Drawings of flames, come back soon notes, and action photos of Juan. Martina, invited this time to the station, stood modestly at the back, holding a folder with Juan's rehab report to share with the station's medical staff. "Excellent work, Dr. Herrera," Captain Sanchez said quietly as he shook her hand. "This gesture strengthens our family even more." She smiled, eyes on the colorful mural. "Thanks to Juan's courage, we're all here today. I'm proud of him, and of all of you." The afternoon unfolded in a festive mood. Dominoes and canasta games sprang up for dinner, alongside a barbecue of fine cuts each firefighter brought according to duty schedule. In one corner, a guitar-playing firefighter started a camaraderie song, and the refrain of "You'll Come Back" mingled with clinking glasses and crackling wood. Before night fell, the captain raised a glass of mineral water for a toast. "To Juan Herrera, who shows us that fire, and life itself, can be tamed with courage, science, and family love. Here's to his swift recovery, and to his next heroic return to the streets with us." Everyone raised their glasses and cried, "To Herrera!" The final applause roared through walls and hearts. In that moment, the promise of a heroic return became a pact. The fire brigade would wait for Juan with open arms, ready to join him on his next mission. The hospital corridor felt different now. Fewer machines and more faces, doctors, nurses, and aides, peeking in to see Juan. His family had turned the cold hallway into a celebration path. Balloons tied to the handrails, a hand-painted banner reading, "Stay strong, Juan," and a makeshift stage where some of the staff's children handed him drawings full of hearts and colorful flames. Martina pushed Juan's wheelchair. He wore comfortable clothes and a gray sweater, a light blanket over his legs. His heavy bandages were gone, replaced by a clean, lightweight brace. As they moved down the hall, cheers rose and hands patted the back of his chair. Every teammate who'd cared for him offered applause and quick hugs. "Way to go, Juan," called Nurse Ortiz, planting a kiss on his cheek. "Welcome to the land of 'you're discharged,'" joked old attendant Paredes in his deep voice. "Time to train for that comeback." Halfway down, Dr. Rojas appeared at the front of the group, a white flower pinned to his coat. He raised his hand and announced, "Clear a path, everyone. Our star patient is heading out the main door. The crowd parted like curtains, and the cheering escort formed an honor guard. When Juan and Martina reached the entrance, admin staff and security guards applauded. A shower of biodegradable confetti fell as Guard Perez snapped to salute. "Hold right there, firefighter Herrera. Prepare for your next duty," he called. Martina leaned in to adjust the blanket and whispered, "Look, Dad, the whole hospital's celebrating you." Juan inhaled, eyes moist. "I never imagined so much emotion." "Thank you." Pushing through the sliding doors, they were greeted by golden afternoon sun. A cool breeze brushed Juan's face. Outside, a small garden with flowers and a fountain led to a waiting truck where Juan's mother and neighbors stood ready to take him home. His mother ran forward, hugged him tightly, and cried, "My son, I feared I'd lost my strength forever, but look how you're coming back." Martina watched with a bright smile. Still seated, Juan raised his hand to wave and added, "Thank you all for never giving up on me. This isn't just a discharge, it's a rebirth." Gently, Martina pushed him toward the ramp, promising softly, "Soon you'll be walking and training with your fire crew, just like you always dreamed." Juan nodded, buoyed by the outpouring of love around him, knowing his road to full recovery was only beginning, but that he would never walk it alone. That afternoon at home, Juan found the warm quiet of his living room. Only the floor lamp by the sofa was on, the curtains partly drawn, and the familiar scent of coffee and toast in the air. Martina helped him settle into the armchair and draped a light blanket over his legs. The bustle of the hospital felt far away, replaced by the gentle hum of the city outside. But despite the calm surroundings, Juan's heart raced with worry. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. The sharp pain in his thigh reminded him of the moment in surgery when the screw shifted the graft and blood flow dropped from 85% to 60%. For the first time, he feared the experimental technique might not be enough. What if the graft fails again? Doubts settled over him like fog. He remembered Dr. Rojas's warning. If the technique didn't hold, amputation would be the only safe option. A flood of thoughts crowded his mind. What will my crew say? Would it be better to accept a prosthetic leg now than risk another operation? Martina came in with a mug of warm milk and found him staring off. She sat beside him and gently asked, "Dad, are you okay?" Juan opened his eyes with effort and took a deep breath. "I don't know, sweetie. I thought I'd beaten the fear, but now I'm terrified this hidden injury could come back even worse." Martina frowned and took his hand. "It's normal to have doubts after what we've been through, but remember, every test showed stable flow. Your body responded well to the growth factors and bone fixation." Juan pulled back the blanket to look at his brace. What if this is just a temporary fix? What if in a few days the graft collapses and I'm worse off than before? Martina looked him in the eyes, determined. "This outcome isn't magic, Dad. It's science, backed by careful monitoring. You'll see at each follow-up ultrasound. There's a whole medical team watching you, tests every 12 hours, and a rehab plan just for you. You won't face uncertainty alone." He lowered his gaze, weighed down by his fears, and whispered, "I feel like I'm hanging by a thread." She squeezed his hand and lifted his chin so he'd meet her gaze. "That thread is hope, tied to the courage you've always shown. You're a firefighter. Facing fire and fear is what you do. I'm here every day, at every test. You don't have to face this alone." Juan took a moment to absorb her words. The certainty of science, combined with Martina's unwavering love, anchored him. He breathed in the warm milk's aroma and let the warmth fill his chest. "You're right," he said firmly. "I'm not giving up now." Martina smiled with relief and kissed his forehead. "Tomorrow at the clinic, we'll review your ultrasound results and plan the next steps. You'll be in good hands." Juan nodded and closed his eyes, letting his daughter's strength clear the fog of fear. He knew his next battle wouldn't be against the scalpel, but against his own doubts. And with Martina by his side, he was ready to reignite his faith in his own strength. The next morning, mid-morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains of the home rehab room. Juan rested in a recliner, his right leg propped on pillows with a brace visible. He still held the cup of tea Martina had just brought him. His eyes, once full of resolve, now carried a shadow of doubt. He feared that one small setback would send him back to the ICU or worse, to the operating table for amputation. Martina had been offering the same encouraging words for minutes, but he stayed silent, avoiding her gaze. Finally, she set the cup on the side table and sat down in front of him, straightforward. "Dad, I've noticed you're having trouble sleeping and your mood is low," she began gently. "I want to know what's really going on." Juan turned his eyes to the window, where a patch of blue sky showed. "It's just, I'm scared, sweetie. Scared this won't hold long term. That the graft could fail when I least expect it, and all this effort will have been for nothing." She frowned, holding back her own emotion, and spoke a little louder. "Listen well. This miracle that saved your leg isn't magic. It's science applied carefully." Juan looked at her, surprised by her firmness. "Science? But science fails sometimes. It's not perfect." Martina leaned forward and placed both hands on his shoulders. "Of course it can fail. But every step we took was backed by studies, protocols, experts, and tests. It wasn't a leap into the void, Dad." He blinked, remembering the 12-hour checkups, the ultrasound confirming blood flow, the medical team watching his case. Yet fear lingered. "And what if, in a month or two, I wake up and there's no flow again?" he asked quietly. "Will I face that scalpel once more?" Martina clenched her fist with determination. "No. Every stage of your recovery is backed by monitoring and adjustments. If there were any sign of trouble, we'd catch it before it hurts you or puts you at risk." Juan swallowed and shook his head. "Still, I can't stop thinking about a possible relapse." Martina took a deep breath and fixed her gaze on him. "Dad, I know the fear is real, but you can't give up prematurely. Every day you make progress in physio, every follow-up ultrasound, every conversation with your medical team, it all reaffirms that this is working." In a softer but firm voice, she finished. "Trust the process and the team. Trust me, and trust yourself." A warm silence followed. Juan dropped his gaze, admiring his daughter's conviction, the very reason he'd fought that initial prognosis. He looked up, gratitude tugging at his lips. "You're right. I've been a coward letting fear win." Martina gave him a relieved smile and kissed his forehead. "You're not a coward. You're human. Now get up. Let's walk a bit." Juan nodded with renewed resolve. With Martina's help, he grabbed the support bar on the wall and stood up, ready to continue the long road to recovery, knowing that science and his family's love would support him every step of the way. It was a clear Sunday morning when the fire station, still repaired after the earthquake damage, officially reopened its doors. The yellow brick facade gleamed with a fresh coat of paint, and above the entrance hung a new sign, Juan Herrera Fire Station. Inside, LED lights lit the renovated lobby, and the locker room door shone with stainless steel handles. At the access ramp, Juan arrived using his orthopedic cane, flanked by Martina on his right and Captain Sanchez on his left. Their footsteps rang confidently on the polished concrete floor. Though he still felt a twinge in his right leg, every step was a victory over fear and uncertainty. The fire crew assembled before the door, all in uniform, helmets polished, banners waving. Captain Sanchez took the microphone and welcomed everyone. "Friends, today is historic. This station has been rebuilt, but even more important, we celebrate the return of our brother, Juan Herrera." A murmur of approval rippled through the line, then respectful silence. Juan drew a deep breath and raised his hand in greeting. "Thank you, everyone," he said firmly. "This station represents our unity and our calling. Today, thanks to so many supporters and the courage of my daughter Martina, I return to the place that has always been my professional home." The applause exploded with pride. One by one, firefighters stepped forward to shake his hand or give him a hug. Sergeant Lopez placed the yellow helmet back on his head. "This helmet is yours again, brother," Lopez said, emotion in his voice. "Wear it well, and protect us too." Juan smiled and carefully settled the helmet on his head. Captain Sanchez announced the ribbon cutting. Juan took the golden scissors. "For the strength and courage of us all," he declared, "I hereby open the station." He cut the tricolor ribbon. A roar of applause followed as the door swung open and the blue sky peaked above. Behind him, Martina held the folder with the updated training plan and the upcoming shift schedule, ready to resume her role as the station's medical support. The first group formed up inside, the new ladder truck gleaming, the pumper fully equipped, tools neatly arranged. One walked the aisle with steady steps, greeting each colleague and admiring the new lockers, each engraved with its owner's name. "Everything looks perfect," Juan remarked, looking at the lockers. "Thanks to everyone who worked day and night after the quake." Captain Sanchez's voice rang out again. "Today we don't just reopen a building. We begin a new chapter for an exemplary firefighter. Welcome back, Juan Herrera." The crew chanted his name as Juan saluted with his helmet, then turned to Martina with a shared look of pride. "We did this together," he whispered. Martina beamed. In the midday light, father and daughter joined the beating heart of the station, ready to serve the community with renewed strength and unity. Mid-morning sun warmed the fire station's backyard, where 5 new recruits stood in a formal line before Captain Sanchez. Juan Herrera stood next to the captain, his helmet resting on his head. In one hand he held a fire extinguisher, and with the other he offered a reflective vest to the recruits. Martina watched proudly at his side. She'd quickly shifted from surgeon to assistant trainer, making sure each recruit learned both the medical basics and the spirit of service that defined their crew. "Good morning, recruits," Juan began in a clear, confident voice. "Today you'll learn how to use the extinguisher and why we do it, to save lives, protect our community, and most importantly, to support each other." The recruits, wearing gray trousers, blue shirts, and safety boots, looked down respectfully. Captain Sanchez introduced Juan, explaining that after surviving an experimental surgery to save his leg, he was back and ready to share his experience. Juan Herrera was the first firefighter in during last year's big forest fire, Sanchez added. "Today he'll teach you how to stand firm against flames and fear." The captain stepped back, inviting Juan to lead. Juan nodded, drew a deep breath, and called the first recruit forward, Ramirez, a young man with intense eyes. "Ramirez," Juan said, "come here and tell me what you see on this extinguisher." Ramirez stepped up, held the extinguisher with both hands, and replied, "It's a dry chemical extinguisher for Class A, B, and C fires. Nitrogen pressure at 200 bar, with an adjustable nozzle." "Exactly," Juan agreed. "But knowing the specs isn't enough. You must feel the responsibility of using it. Imagine your brother-in-arms trapped in a smoke-filled room. That nozzle could be the difference between life and death." Ramirez nodded, understanding that technical details needed a human focus. Juan moved to the next recruit, Herrera, who was curiously no relation but shared the same last name, and handed him the vest. "Herrera," Juan called, "put on the vest and show me the basic rescue stance. Feet apart, knees slightly bent back straight, eyes forward." Herrera followed orders, standing firm yet relaxed, vest secured and helmet adjusted. Juan evaluated his posture. "Good, but lower your center of gravity. When entering a burning building, the floor can give way. A stable base is key." Nearby, physiotherapist Ortiz jotted notes in her tracking book. The third recruit, Martine, approached with a rolled-up hose. Martine, Juan instructed, unroll the hose, connect it to the main hydrant, and get ready for flow control practice. Martine turned the hydrant valve with effort, and the hose uncoiled with a hiss of pressure. Juan took the nozzle and guided Martine's hand through the spray technique. The goal isn't to put out the whole fire at once, but to contain its spread and protect escape routes. Aim at the base of the flame, not the top. Keep the nozzle 20 to 30 centimeters from the fire, using a sweeping motion. Martine imitated the move, controlling his strength. Water shot out strongly, and Juan, acting as inspector, assessed his technique. That's it. Good work. Meanwhile, the other recruits practiced rescue knots with thick ropes. Juan walked between them, checking each loop for security. Remember, a loose knot isn't a knot. At height, every second counts. Under a makeshift shade in the corner, Martina prepared a small first aid kit to demonstrate treating minor burns. Now we'll learn to care for a mild burn. First, cool the area with warm, not cold water. Then apply aloe gel and cover with a sterile gauze. Each recruit came forward to apply gel to a practice dummy with fake burns. Martina supervised and explained. Burns hurt, but proper treatment reduces infection and speeds healing. After first aid practice, Juan gathered the group for a final reflection. Today you practiced firefighting, rescue, and first aid. But beyond skill, true courage means trusting yourselves and your teammates. Never hesitate to ask for help, or to give it. In the fire or the operating room, teamwork saves lives. The recruits, their eyes shining with sweat and excitement, lined up for a salute. Top-level training, they shouted in unison, raising their right fists. Juan returned the salute, feeling deep pride. Every step in his recovery let him share a lifetime and an operation's worth of lessons. Martina, smiling broadly, gathered the first aid kit and stepped up to him. Great job, Dad. They needed to hear your experience, and I need to give back what they gave me, Juan replied, voice full of emotion. Bravery, support, and hope. The training ceremony ended with a round of applause. Captain Sanchez approached and shook Juan's hand. You're a living example, Juan. Today you made a real difference in their careers. Juan nodded humbly. With Martina beside him, he watched the new recruits, now a bit stronger and better prepared for fire and for life. The city sky was fading away, covered in a soft blanket of purple and orange, as if the horizon itself were lit by a gentle fire. Juan and Martina walked side by side down the cobblestone street in front of their house, each step echoing the promise of a new beginning. Juan's right leg, strong beneath its lightweight brace, kept a steady rhythm. His orthopedic cane, now an extension of his arm, supported him without complaint. Martina, her sweater tied around her waist and her hands free, matched his pace, attentive to his stride and his breathing. The light grew dimmer. One by one, the street lamps came on, casting warm circles on the sidewalk. Crickets began their evening song, blending with the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of wind through the linden trees. The fresh air carried the taste of early autumn, equal parts nostalgia and hope in every breath. Dad, Martina said softly, breaking the calm. Look at this moment, the sky and the lights. I don't think I've ever seen a sunset so alive. Juan turned to her, admiring his daughter's silhouette against the fiery sky. He saw both the proud young doctor who'd challenged protocols and rebuilt hospitals with her conviction, and the little girl who'd once promised to heal him. His heart, still beating with the echoes of surgery, swelled with gratitude. It's beautiful, sweetheart, he replied. It reminds me that life can be rebuilt with patience and trust, just like we repaired the sky after the quake. She smiled, understanding the echo in his words. Together they had mended fractures and doubts, stitched hope with firm sutures, and watered courage with tears and sweat. Their journey had been a choreography of pain and triumph, of scalpels and hoses, of science and fire. When they reached their porch, Juan reached out to open the door. It creaked softly, admitting them into the familiar warmth of home. The polished wood floor, the lingering aroma of coffee on the table, and the dining chairs lined up like silent witnesses. On the mantel sat family photographs, Juan in his firefighter uniform hugging a newly graduated Martina, a snapshot of his crew, and the childish drawing she'd once given him. Each image told a chapter of their shared story. Martina hung the reflective vest she still carried on its hook by the door. Then she moved to the stove, clicked on the mocha pot, and filled 2 steaming cups of coffee. Tiny spirals of steam rose before dissipating into the room. On the counter sat a mortar with the last bits of chamomile and ginger, remnants of the soothing teas that had carried him through sleepless nights. "Strong coffee, just how you like it," she announced, placing the cups on the table. "And avocado toast with egg to refuel." Juan nodded and wrapped both hands around his cup. The warmth spread through his fingers and eased his still tense muscles. He took a careful sip, savoring the familiar bitterness balanced by just the right touch of sugar, then closed his eyes and let the moment wash over him. "Tastes like victory," he murmured. Martina sat opposite him and watched as he set his mug on a cork coaster stamped with a stylized flame. Then she handed him a small plate with perfectly toasted bread, creamy avocado, and a fried egg on top. "To your health, Dad," she toasted, raising her cup. He tapped his mug gently against hers. "To you, darling," he replied. "I couldn't have gotten here without your steady hand." They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the soft tick of the wall clock. Each bite and sip felt like a small ceremony of gratitude, for restored health, for a safe home, and for unwavering company. After they'd eaten, Martina helped Juan to his feet and guided him to the living room, where his favorite recliner waited, the very chair he dozed off in each morning with a paper before heading to work. He settled in, and she positioned a footrest under his right leg, lifting it just enough. Then she perched on the armrest and took his hand. "How do you feel?" she asked. Juan squeezed her hand and answered softly, "Ready for whatever comes next. This chair will be my recovery throne, my place to reflect. But tomorrow, I head back to training. Tomorrow, I return to the station with this leg strong." Martina smiled and rested her head against his shoulder. "Tomorrow, and every day after, we're ready for whatever comes together." Outside, night had fully fallen. Through the window, streetlights glowed and store signs blinked gently. Inside, the house was a sanctuary of calm and warmth, a witness to their story and to the many chapters still to come. Juan exhaled slowly, feeling his heart settle. He thought of flames and operating rooms, of fear and science, of his daughter and his own resilience. He knew, without a doubt, that this moment was the culmination of an extraordinary journey. From the chaos of the quake to the peace of this home, each step etched into his skin, his bones, and his soul. "Good night, sweetheart," he said, closing his eyes in contentment. "Good night, Dad," Martina replied. "I'll watch over you like in the ore, only with coffee and laughter." She switched off the floor lamp. Only the soft glow of the digital clock remained, and the distant rumble of a passing car. Silence filled the room with gratitude, promise, and the gentle heartbeat of a new dawn already stirring in their hearts. At the end of this journey with Juan Herrera and his brave daughter Martina, it's clear that the true feat wasn't just saving a leg. It was restoring hope, reconciling fear with trust in science, and celebrating the unbreakable bond between father and daughter. From that night when the earthquake buried not only rubble but also certainty, to the silent operating room where a scalpel built a bridge between firefighting tradition and medical innovation, this story reminds us that our greatest challenges, whether physical or emotional, can become epic tales of triumph when someone believes in us. Juan, whose job was rushing into flames to save others, learned to extinguish the fire of doubt with the same determination, thanks to the knowledge and passion of Martina, his family doctor. We walked with them down cold emergency corridors, heard the roar of sirens and the trembling beat of monitors, felt the crack of bones and the relief of restoring life-giving flow. We watched the operating theater transform into a workshop of precision, where every suture, every drop of growth factor, and every wave of saline wove a promise of life. All around us were the voices of doctors, whispers of skepticism, cheers from firefighters, and above it all, the steady pulse of family love. The story reached its peak when Juan, accustomed to diving into fire to save others, became the hero of his own rescue. Martina, the little girl who once dreamed of healing her father, kept her promise with expertise, courage, and patience. Under her guidance, he walked again among his crew, trained new recruits, and found in every fire extinguisher and every rescue not an echo of his own rehabilitation. Today, on their front porch, father and daughter watch the sunset over a shared cup of coffee. Every sip is a celebration of victory over pain and loss. And as the sky fades to purple, their embrace symbolizes the perfect union of flame and science, of the calling to risk everything and the knowledge to restore lives. May this story inspire us never to give up in the face of the darkest prognosis, and to remember that when medicine and love come together, they can light even the most uncertain paths. Because in the end, the greatest rescue isn't just saving a limb or rebuilding blood vessels. It's awakening in each of us the conviction that, united and armed with science, we can forge new dawns, one step at a time. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and give a like so you won't miss more stories like this one. See you next time!